Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be looking at my fictional AMTRAK map. And here's the New York area. And starting off in New York, we have the two stations of Grand Central and Penn Station. Penn Station has a lot more, but that doesn't really matter. Anyway, the trains that go through here mainly are the Northeast Corridor and the Empire Corridor. And we can start off with the NEC-01, which you can see over here. It's basically just divided into different numbers, but it starts off here in Grand Central and goes up north and then meets in New Rochelle with the other lines from Penn Station. And then it comes around here through Stamford where one of the lines splits off. And then in Milford, another line splits off. But the line that we're focusing on right now, line 1, splits off to go into New Haven, and then it meets up with a little shuttle line in Meriden, and then goes through Springfield and all these other stops, which I'm not going to name because that will take way too long. It meets with a terminating Empire Corridor 4 in Rutland, Vermont, and then it comes up where it meets with a terminating Downeaster 3 in Burlington. And then it continues through St. Albans and then into Canada where it ends in Montreal. And that is line 1 for the Northeast Corridor. Okay, so for line 2, we start off in Penn Station over here, and then we go through Long Island along the Northeast Corridor main line, meet up with all the other lines in New Rochelle, and then there's meets with a branch in Stamford, and then Milford, West Haven, and then we continue along with a branch here in Old Lyme. And then we continue, then we go up north into Providence, where it continues and meets up eventually with the third line. And then you go through southeastern Massachusetts, and then you end up in Boston South, which is just one big blob of the station instead of North and South Station. You can pretend that both exist, just go with it. Anyway, for line 3, it goes back out of Boston, and then at Attleboro, it goes across through to Central Falls, and then in a plus shape across Providence, and then down into Fall River, and then Newport. So for lines 4 and 5, we start off with line 4 in Grand Central and line 5 in Penn Station. And the reason why I'm pairing these together is because when they meet up in New Rochelle, they come together and then they are the ones that branch off in Stamford. Well, one of these. They go through Danbury and then they keep going and then they meet in Falls Village and then continue up until they reach Pittsfield. Now, the line 4 comes through from Pittsfield and branches off in Falls Village and then goes on a more easterly route through some other towns and then meeting in Milford with the rest of the Northeast Corridor and then coming back through into Grand Central. So those are 4 and 5. 6 starts also from Grand Central and then goes through to New Rochelle and then Stamford, the same stations as we have said before, except this time it splits off in East Lyme, meets up with a shuttle in Pomfret Center, and then continues going through to Worcester, and then across into Boston. So for lines 7, 8, and 9, and 10, they all start coming out of Penn Station, and they start going towards west and south. So comes through Secaucus, and then through to Newark, and then continues down to Trenton, Philadelphia, Wilmington, and then comes through here into Baltimore, and then Washington Station. And from Washington Station, you also have a lot of trains, as you can see, and the 9. And the 9 comes through and goes over to Westminster, and then meets up with a different corridor in Hanover, then goes through this plus shape, goes through Reading, through Allentown, Easton, across New Jersey, and back into New York Penn Station in here. And that's 7 and 9. 8 comes from Atlantic City and goes into Philadelphia, straight through there. And 10 starts in Philadelphia and comes across and to Havre de Grace, and then across into Bel Air and skipping over Joppatown, going into Dundalk, Glen Burnie, and then Annapolis. So for the Valley Liberty / Acela Express, we're starting off in Boston, going across through to select stations such as Providence, anytime it branches except for Milford. Then goes into Stamford, New Rochelle, and then along the Long Island branch, and then into Penn Station, back out Penn Station towards Newark, and then through Trenton, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Baltimore, and then Washington. So that is the high-speed rail line. And while we're at it, we might as well go through to this shuttle line here, which actually starts off in Penn Station, and it goes through, passes certain stations, goes along the Hudson line, which we'll get to in a minute. It splits off here in Beacon and goes across into Beekman, and then to New Milford, Waterbury, Meriden, and then comes across into Pomfret Center, and then into Sharon, and then up into Boston. So that is a kind of secondary route. There are no actual tracks for this, I believe. So this is where the fiction starts, apart from the previous routings. Speaking of the Hudson lines, they're actually called the Empire Corridor. They start off in New York and go through to Yonkers, Beacon, Poughkeepsie, Rhinebeck, Hudson, the namesake, then going through to Rensselaer, Albany, Schenectady, Amsterdam, and then across through to Syracuse, and then following all the way through Rochester, where it splits off, and line 2 goes into Niagara Falls, while line 1 goes into Buffalo. In Niagara Falls, there's the third line, which goes around and into Buffalo, along Lake Erie, meeting up with line 4 and 5 in Northeast. That is the town name, not the direction. And then it goes through Ashtabula and then into Cleveland. And then that is where 4 and 5 end. 3 continues, however, going through Freeport and then coming into Toledo and then back up and into Detroit. Speaking of 4 and 5, they start in Cleveland, go through Ashtabula, split off in Northeast, and then come across into Jamestown, Olean, cities through here, and then in Elmira, 4 and 5 split, with 5 going north through Ithaca, back into Syracuse, except it hasn't gone through it at all yet, and then it continues north until it reaches Ogdenburg. Meanwhile, line 4 is going and continuing eastwards into Schenectady, and then it goes until it reaches Rutland. And the second time, or more likely the first time, that the lines 1 and 2 for the Empire Corridor branch off is when the line 2 goes further north so it can reach into Rome and across into Troy. So for the Downeaster lines, we have a 1, 2, and 3, and a 1A. The 1A is a branch that you will see in 2 seconds. So starting off from Boston, going north, it goes into Revere, Lynn, where the 1A splits off through to Salem, Beverly, and then eventually ending in Rockport, while the main branch continues through Peabody, Newburyport, Portsmouth, and then coming through all the way to Portland, and then ending in Brunswick. The 2 line, which we will start from its northern terminus, starts in Orono, goes through Bangor, and then Waterville, Augusta, and then keeps going through and around down into Dover, I think, and then Haverville, Methuen and Lawrence, and then down and through Melrose, back to Revere, and then Boston. Meanwhile, the 3 goes on the western side of Boston and comes through north, through Lowell, Nashua, Manchester, Concord, Laconia, and all the way across into Montpelier and Burlington. So starting in Syracuse, the Keystone Corridor goes through along the Empire Corridor of 5 and then curves around through Williamsport, down through along the line into Harrisburg, where it crosses over into Lancaster and keeps cutting across until it reaches Philadelphia. The Keystone Corridor 2 goes through here on the same side as line 1 for the Keystone Corridor, goes through Harrisburg, same port, and then Williamsport, it splits off, goes along through the Allegheny or the Appalachian Mountains, and then goes through Altoona. This line has the horseshoe curve before Altoona, and then it comes through to here and goes through Latrobe, and then Pittsburgh, where it keeps going through to Youngstown, Wheeling, and then into Cleveland. The line 3 starts all the way back in Harrisburg and goes through this way, where it cuts across into Reading, and then it splits off from Easton to go northwest, and then kind of back east again through Wilkes-Barre and then Scranton. And finally, the 4 goes this way around Philadelphia into Norristown, and then Reading, and then Lebanon, and into Harrisburg, where it continues through these lines, where it goes and stops in Pittsburgh here. So that is how it gets across. So for the Virginian corridor, we have the 0, 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. The 0 and 2 both start off in Pittsburgh, and the 0 follows the southern route through Cumberland and Martinsburg, and then continues down this way into Washington, while the 2 starts out of Washington, goes around through Frederick, and then Hagerstown, and goes back into Pittsburgh. Line 1, on the other hand, begins in Washington and comes around through Fredericksburg, along small towns into Charlottesville, and then into Troutville, where it continues through Blacksburg until it reaches Knoxville, Tennessee, and then Chattanooga, continuing through to Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, and then eventually into New Orleans. Line 3 starts in Washington, D.C., and follows this line down into Richmond, then Petersburg, and then across in through Chesapeake, Norfolk, and Virginia Beach. The 4 goes from Virginia Beach here and follows these stations up until Roanoke, where it moves through and then splits off to go north in through Charleston, and then across into Cincinnati, and then further west until it goes up north into Indianapolis, and then northwest into Chicago. The 5 starts in Jacksonville and continues through to Savannah, where it splits off, goes through to Charlotte, Greensboro, Danville, back into Roanoke, where it does a turn here, and then it goes through Harrisonburg, not here, but Harrisonburg, and then the Strasburg Railway up here, continues going until it reaches Harrisburg. Uh, the Line 6 for the Virginia corridor starts also in Washington, goes through the same line as the 3 does, except it splits off in Richmond, and then it goes eastwards towards the Atlantic to Williamsburg, Hampton, and Newport News. So for the Carolina corridor, it starts off in Virginia Beach with line 1, goes through across into Emporia, and then back down into Rocky Mount, and then Raleigh, where it comes up northern into Durham, and then across into Greensboro, and then across into Winston-Salem, and then all the way across these stations into Knoxville, where the line continues through once it reaches the Kentucky corridor in Livingston, and then goes across Bowling Green, comes across here, where it splits off in Paducah to go to Carbondale, and then splits back into Farmington, cuts across into Jefferson City, and then follows this Kentucky corridor line into Kansas City. For the Carolina 2 line, it starts in Washington, goes through along Richmond, and then splits off in Emporia, where it goes down Scotland Neck, Greenville, Jacksonville, Wilmington, Myrtle Beach, all these stations into Savannah, Brunswick, Jacksonville, where it splits off in St. Augustine, and then goes through to Sanford, Orlando, and then into Dade City and across Tampa and St. Petersburg. The line 3 for the Carolina corridor starts in Memphis over here, goes across into Birmingham, Atlanta, all these cities until it reaches Charlotte, then Raleigh, and then Rocky Mount, and then it meets up with all the other lines that go through here, and then back into Washington, D.C. The Carolina Corridor 4 starts in over here in Dallas, where it goes across directly east in a mostly straight line into Montgomery, and then Macon, and then it comes north east here, where it reaches Greenville, and then it comes into the corridor that leads to Washington. So those are the Carolinian lines. The Kentucky corridor, and line 1 starts off here in Atlanta, and then comes across to Chattanooga, then Oak Ridge, and then all the way across into Cape Girardeau, and then meets back up with the Carolina Corridor 1 into Farmington, and then comes across into Jefferson City, and then eventually ends in Kansas City. The 2 starts off in Virginia Beach, and then goes across the same stations here into across Emporia, and then following this line until it reaches Charleston, where it splits off and goes to Frankfort, Louisville, and then up into Indianapolis, where it continues into Fort Wayne, Defiance, and then Toledo, and then still even further, it goes into Detroit. The 3 starts off in Cleveland over here, and then goes down through Akron, Canton, and then around into Wheeling, and then across Zanesville, Columbus, Springfield, and then down into Cincinnati, Lexington, and then down all the way, and then it meets in Chattanooga, and then goes and ends in Atlanta. The Kentucky Corridor 4 starts off also in Kansas City, and then goes across this way and ends up falling into Detroit, like so. This is this line, like that. The 5 starts in Washington over here. There's Washington. And then it goes out north and around into Westminster, Hagerstown, and along through Morgantown, all these little stops through Columbus, and then meets back up in Toledo and continues on to Detroit. The 5 goes this way through to Amtrak, and then across these cities where it goes on the east end through Pontiac, and then meets back in, and then it splits in Saginaw for a one-stop extension into Bay City. The 4, also on this section, starts in Traverse City, comes around, meets back in Saginaw, and then goes on the west end, going through Bloomfield Hills, and then back into Amtrak and Detroit. The 3 goes across here into Dearborn, and then across into Romulus, Ypsilanti, Jackson, Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, Benton Harbor, Michigan City, and around here into Chicago. The 2 starts in Detroit, goes through into Toledo, and then Defiance, and then across this little line, and goes also into Chicago. The 1 goes from Sarnia, which is actually, it's on the U.S. side on Port Huron, and then it comes down straight through, meets in Amtrak, and goes into Detroit. The additional lines that I added were these 2 lines. The 6 goes, starts off in Muskegon, goes through Grand Rapids, meets together in Lansing, and then continues into Detroit. Meanwhile, the 7 follows the same route, except it splits in Lowell, and then goes through to Wyoming, and then Holland. So those are the Michigan lines. Okay, here we get into the complicated stuff of the Midwest Corridor. It goes across here, and now the 1 and 2, the 1 and 2 does weird things. So this one goes through on the Milwaukee side and Sheboygan, and then meets up in Green Bay, where it does a little split off into Escanaba, and then Marquette. Meanwhile, the 2 comes from Sister Bay, meets up in Green Bay, continues around to Oshkosh and Fond du Lac, and then comes back into Waukegan and then Chicago. The 3 starts off in Wasau, and then comes down through Madison, Janesville, Rockford, and then into Chicago. I believe this was an actual route at some point, at least the Janesville and to Chicago section. I don't know if the rest of the route was ever a thing, but starting off in Janesville here, that was a real route at some point. Not as of right now. In the fictional world, though, yes. Line 4 starts off in Canada, starts off in Winnipeg, comes down through to Fargo, St. Cloud, and then St. Paul, Minneapolis does an interesting thing. So as you see, there's supposed to be a Midwest terminal, but that isn't here, because that is over here for the 1 Midwest corridor, because it is a through, and the other stations, other train lines here don't go all the way through. They end here. We'll get to those in a minute. So, as I said, line 4 continues through St. Paul and Minnesota, meets up in Waterloo, meets again with other lines in Mendota, and then again in Chicago, where it ends. Line 5 goes through here, starts in International Falls or Rainy River. Rainy River's on the Canadian side, I think. And then goes through Bemidji, and then Brainerd comes through here and goes into Chicago. The 6 starts more in central US, starts in Minot, where it goes down, not that way, goes down through Bismarck, and then into Reliance, Sioux Falls, where it kind of meets back up with the 7, and then it continues, not that way, it continues through Des Moines, and then around this way, where it goes up through into here. So to recap, it goes like that. Starting back off in Minot, we have line 7, which continues that way. following my mouse, and then goes through like this, and then back in through Davenport and into Chicago. Line 8 is one of the you could say transcontinental, I guess, or cross-country routes. Starts off in Chicago, goes through here, goes through Des Moines, then Omaha, North Platte, Casper, Idaho Falls, Boise, Bend, Oregon, Eugene, and then kind of along the Cascade corridor, but it ends in Portland here. Now the 9 gets complicated. Starts off in Sacramento, goes to Placerville, where it splits off with the Carson City detour, where it goes through Carson City and South Lake Tahoe, and then the actual line goes through to Tahoe City and Reno, and then the Carson City detour line will also be able to continue all the way until Salt Lake City. So it goes between Salt Lake City and Sacramento, and it splits for these two stations here, and does not stop in Fallon or Elko. The 9 continues in this direction to Rock Springs, Laramie, back down into Denver, and then across Dodge City into St. Joseph, and then Burlington, and then it does not go into Chicago. It goes across here and through Bloomington, and then to Indianapolis, where it still is going, and then it ends in Detroit here. So it goes like that. So it's a big route, and that is what that line consists of. And then we can start on the Cascade corridor. So for the Cascade 1, it starts off in Vancouver, goes through stops in Bellingham, Everett, all these stops along here through Tacoma, DuPont, Olympia, down here through Portland, and then it continues where it goes through Albany, and then meets in Corvallis, where it is the terminal for the Grand Canyon corridor, or the GCC. So you kind of had to take more trains if you want to go down into Portland, which doesn't really make sense, but that's how I decided to do it. For Cascade Corridor 2, we're starting off with our cross-country routes. Again, starting off in Chicago, going through to Waterloo, Mason City, Jackson, Sioux Falls, Rapid City, Gillette, and then the 2 goes this way, through Cody, Bozeman, Lewiston, around here, through to Yakima, and then Seattle, after a stop in Renton. The 3 and 3A both come out of Renton, go to Wenatchee, Spokane, or Spokane, as some people call it, I think. And then it splits off in Thompson Falls, with the 3 continuing through Kalispell, Great Falls, and meeting in Harlowton. And the 3A goes through Missoula and Helena. And then it continues on with the 3 to Billings, and then Gillette, and then, following the same line all the way into Chicago, except it doesn't. It actually splits off in Jackson, with the 3 and 3A going into Minneapolis. While we're here, Luthien is like a special tourist train for Amtrak that goes between St. Paul here, Duluth, and then into Thunder Bay, Canada. So that is like the small little route here. This one in purple. Okay, so for the DSC corridor, or the Deep South corridor, which is kind of a mess. It's all these orange lines here. It's basically between Chicago, El Paso, Laredo, and Miami, kind of, if you take a rectangle like that. Anyways, starting off with line 1 in New Orleans. This is the brand new, I think it's like a day old or a week old, Mardi Gras service from New Orleans, Bay St. Louis, Gulfport, Biloxi, Pascagoula, Mobile, and then I've extended the route to Montgomery, and then across to Macon, and then up into Atlanta here. The 2 starts elsewhere, starting in Laredo here, and going through San Antonio, Austin, where it splits to go through Fort Worth instead of Dallas, going through Ardmore, Oklahoma City, Wichita, Topeka, and into Kansas City. The 3 goes from Chicago, goes through Bloomington, meets up here with stuff in St. Louis, and then it continues going where it splits off in Poplar Bluff, and then splits off again in Conway after Little Rock, and then it comes down here past Jackson, Mississippi, and then loops around into New Orleans like that. The 4 continues out of New Orleans, goes through the same cities as the Mardi Gras, and then continues out of Mobile eastwards instead of northeast. It goes through Pensacola, Tallahassee, Gainesville, Ocala, and then the 4 continues down here until it reaches Cape Coral and Naples. The 5 does something different. It goes from St. Petersburg here, comes up and meets with the 4, splits off again, this time going to Montgomery, Memphis, meeting in Poplar Bluff with the other lines, going through St. Louis, and then coming back into Chicago. The 6 does a weird thing over here. It goes from New Orleans out to Baton Rouge, and then across through to Houston, San Antonio, and then Eagles Pass, where it meets with like this connecting line. As you can see, it connects with each of these lines that end here. The 7 goes from starting out of Laredo here, so the line 6 ended here, and line 7 ends here. So line 7 follows the 2 until Austin, and then splits off to go, like I said, into Dallas. Then it comes across to go into Jefferson City, and then Quincy, and then up into Chicago here. So here we have line 8 in El Paso, goes through Odessa, Colorado City, then Fort Worth and Dallas, and then it comes down here in this curve to Houston, where it extends further down into Corpus Christi, and then it's not Matamoros, because that is in Mexico, which, sorry if I pronounced Matamoros wrong, but it goes to Brownsville. And then the 9 is kind of your Floridian. It starts off in Miami, goes along the coast. In Jacksonville, it splits off and goes towards Atlanta, and then Nashville, and then comes across and winds around into there, which is Chicago. And then the 10 starts off in Galveston, and then goes through Houston, meets up with the line 8, then splits off to go to Longview, Texarkana, meets up in Conway with other lines that split in Batesville. The other lines that split is actually the 10, and it comes across here and goes into Chattanooga and then Knoxville, Tennessee. Okay, so here we have the next corridor, starting kind of the opposite corner of where it ends, but it's actually where most of the lines end, kind of. But we have the GCC, or the Grand Canyon corridor. We have 6 lines for this. So the 1 and 2 both start off in Los Angeles, go to Alhambra, where 1 goes north and 2 goes south. So we'll follow the 2 and take the 1 back. So it goes through these select stations until Riverside, where it splits off, connects with another line in Beaumont, and then that line ends in Palm Springs, but the 2 does not end, as it comes all the way across through Phoenix, meets up with the 3 in Safford, and then splits off again in Silver City, where the 2 goes even more south, through Carlsbad, and then into Colorado City, where it meets up with the one in Abilene, and then the 1 and 2 both go through to Fort Worth and Dallas. The 1 comes out of Dallas, as just mentioned, goes through Fort Worth, Abilene, where it splits north for Lubbock, Albuquerque, Kingman, where Amtrak had a derailment, which was not their fault, but that's what happened there. And then it goes through Barstow and comes through the corridor here. That's kind of north of Los Angeles. And then it comes into here, meets with the 2 in Alhambra again, and then comes into Los Angeles there. For the 3, it starts all the way down in San Diego, and then kind of follows the border here of Mexico, goes to Tuscan, and then meets up here in Safford, splits up again in Silver City, where it goes north across Clovis, meets up in Amarillo, and then a line splits off in Sayre, which is the 4. The 3 comes through Oklahoma City, and then meets through Jefferson City, and comes all the way to Chicago. So it's a very, very long line as it goes like that. The 4, as we mentioned, it comes through, it's one of these lines that end in Corvallis that I mentioned before. There's the 4 and the 6 that end here. So the 4 and the 6 go through to Eugene, Bend, and then splits off in Boise. And then they come through here, where the 6 splits off to go further east. The 4 comes down through Salt Lake City, and then comes across down here, meets or crosses Conscious Dam with the 6, and then goes to Amarillo, and then it does this weird dip back the other direction to go across and to Brownsville to kind of connect. So it goes like that. The 5, which I know I mentioned the 6, but we'll go back to it. The 5 starts off in Minneapolis, over here. And then it comes through to these cities where it splits off in Sioux Falls to go south to Omaha, and then follows the 8 of the Midwest corridor until North Platte, where it goes to Cheyenne, then dips south into Denver, and then continues across all the way here to Las Vegas, and then back into the area with the 1 that leads to Los Angeles. So it goes like that, if that makes sense. The 6, which we can start from here because, it goes through Corvallis and then Boise and then splits here in Logan. So once it gets out of Logan, it comes down here, and then goes south through Denver, and then comes through here, meets in Clovis, with the 3. It doesn't meet the 4 until it passes Abilene, and then it goes all the way into Fort Worth and Dallas. The 6 does. So that is that corridor. Okay, so now we are on to the SoCal corridor, which starts off here in San Francisco, comes across the existing Caltrain line, and then goes into San Jose. The 1 then continues through Morgan Hill, Gilroy, Prunedale, ends in Monterey. The 2 and 2A begin in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz goes through to here, Watsonville, Prunedale, and then continues along this line to Salinas, and then San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, where it splits, and the 2A goes south through Ventura and Oxnard, and then meets up in Burbank, but we'll get to that in a second, because up here, the line that is for line 2. Goes through the northern route of Santa Paula through these cities, and then also meets in Burbank, and then both the 2 and 2A go into Los Angeles. Starting with the 3 again, goes to Santa Cruz, and then comes up here in San Jose, Milpitas, then along this corridor where it splits off in San Pablo, or Pablo. It doesn't go on the split, it continues through here, and then keeps going north all the way to Ukiah, and then Willits, where it splits off real into Fort Bragg. And I confused myself because I thought that was water, but that's not. That's a national park. This is water. Anyway, the 4 also starts here and goes along the western side of this corridor and ends here in Sausalito. So it goes like that. The 5 does some basically simple thing, goes through Sacramento, comes through these cities, goes along this corridor, and then comes through Milpitas, and then goes across here into Monterey. The 6 starts all the way up in Eugene, comes through Cottage Grove, all these cities, Medford, Klamath Falls, Redding, Chico, Yuba City, where it continues away from the Coast Starlight corridor here, which is one of the named trains that we had to do. And then it goes through Woodland, Davis, all these cities where it continues to go across into Napa, Sonoma, Petaluma, and then Sausalito here. So it is a long line. The 7 goes from all the way down in Los Angeles here, comes out this way through Santa Clarita, and then Palmdale and the Tehachapi area, through the Mojave Desert, which is around there, I think. And then Bakersfield, and then Fresno, and Merced, and Stockton, and then it continues up through Sacramento, Yuba City, Chico, Red Bluff, and then ends in Redding here. The 6 continues north. The Redding is where the 7 ends. And I'm not saying all these stops because wherever you see a white dot is actually where the Coast Starlight will stop. The black dot is where it doesn't stop because the Coast Starlight goes further and doesn't need to have more stops, if that makes sense. Unless it's bigger stations. So the 8 goes around here, starts in San Jose, and then goes across here and does this weird thing where it loops over this way and then comes through into Stockton like that. And then the 9 goes down through here from Sacramento and comes down this way, and then splits in Tracy where it goes to Livermore, meets back up in Milpitas, and then goes and ends itself in San Jose. So the 8 kind of goes around and then ends in Stockton, and the 9 goes from Sacramento and does a shorter, more reasonable route. Now I've been mentioning the Coast Starlight a lot, so before we move on to the next corridor, let's start with that. So it goes very far. So it's the Coast Starlight, which is a real train. I don't know if the route is real that I followed, but anyways, it starts off in Vancouver, goes through Bellingham, Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, Portland, Eugene, Klamath Falls, Redding, Yuba City, Sacramento, Merced, Fresno, Bakersfield, follows these routes into Los Angeles, where it continues down a track that goes through to Long Beach, Huntington Beach, San Clemente, Oceanside. It kind of follows the coaster corridor here into San Diego. So San Diego to Vancouver in a pretty straight line for the most part. This is the named train that kind of doesn't make sense because I believe there's a Crescent City train that's on the East Coast, but whatever. I call this the Crescent City because it ends in Crescent City, California. So it starts off, goes through Eureka, meets in Willits, and then splits immediately back off in Ikea, and then comes through Santa Rosa, goes through here, and comes along this corridor where it continues through Milpitas and then goes on a different branch, so it can go through to Cupertino and Saratoga, and then meets back up, and then goes into Santa Cruz. So it goes from Santa Cruz here and kind of goes like that. And then we'll go on to the final 5 lines. So here's Los Angeles, 1, 2, 4, and 5. 3 is somewhere else. We're going to have to figure out where that is because I didn't look. So this one is straightforward, just comes through and follows the Coast Starlight through this way and goes here. These cities that you can probably see if you pause or care to look. And then there's another line which goes between San Diego and Los Angeles. This one goes through on the far side. It comes off here and comes through Alhambra, and then meets up with another line, and then it decides to come off here and split, and then go down on this east side through Escondido, and then through El Cajon, and then San Diego. The 3 does a weird route, starts in Malibu, and goes to Santa Monica, across through here, where it continues through this way, and then splits off in Irvine, meets in Laguna Miguel, and then comes through along to San Diego, following the other lines. The 4 and 5 both, they both obviously start in Los Angeles, but the 4 comes through on a southerly route through here, where it kind of jumps back up to a line that the 5 has met, but is already split off from. And then it comes through here. The 4 comes through San Jacinto, and then across into Palm Springs. Meanwhile, the 5 ends here in Mentone, comes through like southern San Bernardino, meets in Riverside, and then continues across these cities into Los Angeles. And if I am correct, that should be every single line of the fictional Amtrak map, which is around 100 lines. I've gotten carried away, but trains are better with more. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. If you stayed this entire time, I appreciate it, and why don't you give the video a like and subscribe to my channel. And yeah.